Tradition, trade and culture have connected Europe and China for hundreds of years.
In the 18th century, a small number of products escaped from China and lit a touch paper in the West of excitement.
In this special series, we'll uncover the intertwined social and cultural histories of Europe and China, from the ancient Silk Road to the modern era.
Art is traveling as a silent ambassador to spread the word about culture and civilization.
It's amazingly impressive because they were such incredibly talented artists.
When you talk about silk, with a value of 3 or 4 garments, you could buy a palace.
We'll be seeking out the European spaces where traces of China lie hidden in plain sight.
Wow! This is the Chinese room, and it's definitely one of my favorites within the house.
Welcome to Traces of China.
There is a historical side in my job that is actually fantastic. There is something, when you work on an object that was used on a daily basis by Louis XIV or Marie Antoinette, you have that direct connection to history and to people. But I think what's fascinating is the marquetry work. But that motif here, you would think it's a European marquetry design. And actually, no, it's Chinese. While it's not an obvious Chinese-style object, you do have reminiscence of what later we would call Chinoiserie.
Decorative furniture, blue and white plates, colourful patterns with birds and butterflies. We see this everywhere in our everyday lives, and it has a name. It's called Chinoiserie, but where does it come from?
17th century France, you started to see what we call the age of exploration. And I think most of the European nations quickly realized that if they wanted to develop their industry, they wanted to develop their art and their wealth, they had to go to other parts of the world.
The Palace of Versailles on the outskirts of Paris stands as a majestic symbol of 17th century French grandeur. It was built by King Louis XIV, not just as a royal residence, but also home to his vast collection of art from across the world.
Here, in this big panel, in the background, you can see a pagoda. In European paintings which describe China, there was always a pagoda.
Known as the Great Sun King, Louis XIV was on the throne from the age of 4 and reigned for 72 years, the longest of any European monarch.
Louis XIV is possibly the most important king in French history. He was appointed by God. As we know, most kings are appointed by God. Unfortunately for Louis XIV, when he's a young teenager, there is an early revolution against him. So he moves to Versailles. Versailles, to start with, is only a small hunting lodge. And then it becomes a center of government. And of course, when you invite an ambassador from abroad, you want to impress them, so you then develop Versailles into this massive palace that we know today.
Tell me a little bit about Louis XIV. What was he like?
Louis XIV loved paintings. He was a great collector. He ordered many, many paintings for the decoration of the castle, but he liked also decorative arts, he liked sculpture, he liked all the arts.
Where did his interest in Chinese culture come from?
His interest for China came very early. Many books were published at this time, written by merchants or missionaries who went to China, and it gave an idea of the main monuments of Beijing and other places. So the knowledge about China was changing really at this time.
As knowledge continues to spread, the king hears word of a great porcelain temple in the Chinese city of Nanjing.
It's one of the tallest buildings of Asia. It became one of the 8 wonders of the world at the time.
The great Sun King's appetite to impress, combined with his infatuation with the East, leads him to an elaborate plan.
I think when you're appointed by God, you're immediately going to be a bit flamboyant and believe in yourself. I think in English you call it an egocentric. So if the Chinese can make a Chinese pagoda, let's make a porcelain building in Versailles. But the biggest problem is we couldn't make porcelain. Everybody was working on the trade secret. Everybody was trying to make porcelain. So they decided, instead of making it in porcelain, to make it in ordinary terracotta and glazed in white. And that's when the Trianon de Porcelaine was born.
The Trianon de Porcelaine is hailed as the very first example of chinoiserie, inspired by China, made in France.
And it was decorated with hundreds of enormous blue and white terracotta pots standing on the top of the roof.
The extravagant structure was built on these very grounds of Versailles in 1670, a celebrated masterpiece of artistic innovation and cultural aspirations.
Unfortunately, because it was made of European ceramic and not porcelain, it didn't last very long. The first frost came in and suddenly started cracking. So that building was eventually destroyed in less than 15 years.
The ongoing costs and maintenance of the faux porcelain palace led to its replacement with the Grand Trianon, the durable marble structure still standing on the same grounds of Versailles today. While the porcelain palace didn't survive, the appetite for Chinese art was growing fast with the upper classes. Becoming so popular, the supply from China couldn't meet the demand.
I'm curator at the Musée des Arts Décoratifs, and I'm head of the Asian collections. We're moving pieces, changing pieces for the 60th anniversary of the French and Chinese cultural relationship. Famous portrait of the Chinoiserie Emperor.
Here at the Musée des Arts Décoratifs, a unique collection has been presented to illustrate a profound moment in European art history. Beatrice, tell me what we're looking at here.
Here we're looking at Chinese porcelain on the top shelf, and then European ceramics on the two lower here, in the purpose of showing how China had influenced the other manufacturers in Europe.
What kind of differences are we looking for between the Chinese originals and then the European copies?
There's different things. For example, this dish, the large dish, is Chinese, made specially for the European market, using Chinese symbols, Chinese decoration motif. This dish mimics it, but even enhancing it by this relief that they made. Sometimes the French adapted to their own taste and to their own idea of what was Chinese and what was not. We can go to this part of the showcase, for example.
This is a beautiful dragon here.
Yes, the European painter didn't understand quite well the Chinese model and changed the face of the dragon. And also we have to remember the meaning of the dragon was totally opposite. Dragon in China particularly, it was the symbol of the emperor, where in Europe it was more the symbol of evil.
These French artists were now turning their hands to a new style of decoration, set to take Europe by storm.
You would have a book with prints, and then the European man, never seen a pagoda in his life, but will draw a copy that pagoda from that book onto his piece of furniture.
This is amazing. What are we looking at here?
This area, which is very interesting, is it's a mixture between Chinese object origin, like the paneling here, all the red paneling, the porcelain here, and also imitation of the Chinese model. This is not Chinese, this is totally imitation from Germany and Delft.
Imitating, but also imitating with a need of adapt it to your style of living.
Within this installation, designed to look like the shop of an 18th century art dealer, we can see how the Chinese aesthetic has been mixed with practical furniture designs for a European customer.
In Asia, they don't make furniture on leg. as opposed to Europe, where everything is on legs. So in order to get what you want for your French castle, you have to make a French cabinet, and if you want it in the style of China, that's when you start integrating Chinese element to it. And that's when it's becoming that kind of chinoiserie style. You have a mix of the two worlds put together into one object.
What was it about France that made it this big center of chinoiserie?
Interestingly enough, the trade was not so much into the French hands. And it started long before with the Portuguese, the Spanish, and the Dutch. But the taste in Europe, what was good taste, was given by the French court.
Yeah, because the term chinoiserie is a French term.
Indeed, but not used in the 18th century. Probably first half of the 19th century, the fashion of revivaling some old style from the 18th century participate to this invention of word, chinoiserie.
So while the 18th century is considered the golden age of chinoiserie, it wasn't until the 19th century resurgence that the term was coined, receiving a mixture of reviews.
The origin of chinoiserie, when Louis XIV did the triangle de porcelain, I think it was done with great taste. And you know, sometimes we say less is more. Well, by the 19th century, they lost that concept of less and more.
Echoes of the playful chinoiserie style were increasingly scattered across Europe, subtly hidden in plain sight. This trend, however, left some Paris residents feeling a need for something more authentic. Hello!
Emilia, welcome to the Pagoda. So happy to see you. Come in.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Oh my gosh, this is amazing.
I know. And you wouldn't expect this in the middle of Paris.
How incredible to just find this in the middle of all the Parisian buildings. Who built this?
It was built in 1926 by Monsieur Lowe, the famous Asian art dealer, who built this place as a place of cultural exchange and an art gallery.
This building was known as the Paris Pagoda and was purchased by the art dealer C.T. Lowe in 1925 as a typical Parisian townhouse. It was then transformed into an authentic-looking pagoda to be a center point for Asian art dealings in the Western world. What are the most interesting architectural features here?
Well, I think already the outside of the building and the location is amazing. You have all the architectural features of a Chinese pagoda and all the elements. This window lacing, for example, is exactly the same lacing as it is in the Forbidden City.
Oh, wow. Can we take a look around?
Yes, follow me.
Since its creation in 1926, the Paris Pagoda has gone from private residence to art gallery, event space, and exclusive film and photography location. Look at this! This is incredible.
It is. It is still amazing, even
Wow.
after 100 years. It's almost modern, I feel. So the whole building was used to showcase Chinese and Asian art. And lacquer walls or paravents were a big feature, a big part of Asian art, and it was unique. It had never been seen in France before.
C.T. Lowe is a controversial figure. He's been accused of illegally taking ancient artifacts from China at a time of political instability. But he's also been credited with making Chinese art even more popular by introducing the Western world to aesthetics they'd never seen before.
I think the sheer logistic of this business is what fascinates me. And just to emphasize this, I want to show you something. Look what I found during the renovation.
Oh, wow, so this is a cupboard.
It's a cupboard with a little trap here. And this is his telephone.
Sweet! You take your
So,
calls.
Asian art dealings in the beginning of the last century from a little telephone hidden in a wall cabinet.
Wow! Does it still work?
Yes, it's a direct line to the Forbidden City, of course.
What was the legacy of Mr. Lowe?
I think Monsieur Lowe helped moving away from chinoiserie to real Chinese antiques and to help the Western world recognizing the craftsmanship and the artistic genius of Chinese people in their oldest form.
Established in 1898, the Chinoiserie Asian Art Museum in Paris is home to one of Europe's largest collections of real Chinese art, spanning from antiquity to the modern era.
If there was one thing to remember about Chinese art is that depending on the places where you go and the centuries when the pieces were produced, it's not exactly the same kind of culture. China has evolved, has changed.
So it's very hard to define Chinese art.
Yes, it is. In fact, you should always use the plural, Chinese arts. And when you're talking about Chinese arts, you should define what kind of art you are talking about.
So how were all of these artworks received by the French people at the time?
The decorative arts were fascinating in some way by the way they were made, which required a lot of work. And it's very obvious on this kind of cloisonné there, because what you have there is a vase which is made out of a metal core. These are all the golden designs that you have there.
Who would something like this have been made for?
Obviously for the aristocracy of the court, because this kind of technique is very expensive, even on smaller objects. So when it's something of this size, it's made for people who have a lot of money.
Cloisonné is an ancient art form that in this case began its life in Europe and then travelled to China along the Silk Road in the 1400s. There, the intricate craft saw significant development to become the iconic Chinese style we would recognize today.
It's a long process, it's an expensive process. You have to bend the wire, so you have these empty cells. Then you fill these empty cells, each one with a different color. I think cloisonné also gives a good example of exchange of technology that came from west to east and came back from east to west.
On the northeastern border of France is the small town of Longwy, famous for a particular type of ceramics that has become renowned here over the past century, a style that Jacques Piffer was introduced to from a young age.
Je fais de la céramique depuis les années 1957. J'ai eu la chance d'avoir un père qui s'intéressait également à la céramique et qui m'a construit un premier four lorsque j'avais 9 ans. Depuis, je n'arrête pas de cuire.
C'est Jacques.
Très heureux.
Oh,
vous allez bien?
Beaucoup.
C'est gentil de venir nous rendre visite. Le cloisonné me semble très intéressant parce qu'il a une intensité. Le cloisonné va apporter déjà du volume et va apporter un jeu de lumière. C'est cette lumière qui est importante.
Throughout his career, Jacques has been pioneering a style of Longwy cloisonné.
Nous allons vers le muséum de la manufacture. C'est un musée privé avec des pièces en dépôt.
The work on display in Jacques' personal museum presents a clear vision of his cultural influences, with a special relationship at its heart.
Et ici, des influences de la Chine, où on va reconnaître le dragon.
Jacques, we've been learning about cloisonné, but it's made with metal, isn't it? This looks a bit different. Is this cloisonné?
Alors, ce sont des différences extrêmement subtiles, pas toujours très simples à comprendre. On a ici des émaux qui ressemblent à des émaux cloisonnés chinois, mais qui sont des émaux cernés de Longwy. C'est-à-dire que l'on a un style chinois, une influence chinoise et une technologie occidentale, une technologie française. Et qu'est-ce que l'on fait à ce moment-là? Voilà.
For the past 47 years, Jacques has been producing and selling Longwy cloisonnés here on site, with the help of his small expert team.
Entrez dans l'atelier.
Wow!
Voici donc Michel qui est au travail.
Bonjour Michel. Bonjour.
Est-ce que c'est un travail que vous aimeriez faire, vous aussi?
Great, sounds great.
Essayez.
Just like the Chinoiserie originators, Jacques draws inspiration from an historic archive of Chinese designs.
Alors, voilà le poncif. Et puis, on reprend de la couleur et on y va. Ça va bien. On essaye?
Okay, I will try.
Allez, courage.
Thank you. So what are the differences between this and cloisonné?
Que les émaux cloisonnés sont en creux. La cloison est en relief et les émaux sont en creux. À Longwy, c'est l'inverse. Le trait noir, le cerné, est en creux et les émaux sont en relief.
This is the big moment of colour. So we have to put it on quite thick.
Oui, encore, voilà. Ah, c'est très bien. Eh bien, écoutez, là, je vais préparer votre contrat.
Oh, I can make this.
Oui.
Here's one I made earlier. It's going to look like that, I promise. Jacques' art is a beautiful example of the evolving creative relationship between two cultures. At its essence, Chinoiserie is about inspiration and fantasy, a romantic interpretation of Chinese art that is both unique and a celebration of its origins. What sort of role do you think art plays in the evolving relationship between the East and the West?
That's a wonderful question. Citilo once said, art has no frontiers. Art is traveling as a silent ambassador to spread the word about culture and civilization. And I think that was true then and is still true now.
We speak about chinoiserie today. You also have to understand that the European taste in the Chinese court was as important as the Chinois taste in the French court.
On a besoin d'échanger des points de vue, on a besoin d'échanger des matériaux, parce que l'art est humain. Et l'humain ne peut pas se passer de son voisin, que ce soit le voisin d'à côté ou que ce soit un voisin de très loin.
Look at this window. It really symbolizes the idea of the pagoda, to bring together the East and the West. We have the impression to be in China, but when you look out of the window, you see the Haussmannian architecture. And the magic is, one doesn't disturb the other. In fact, it's complementing each other.